Get out. The words came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I didn't know existed until this moment. The suitcases hit the floor with a dull thud, their contents spilling across the makeshift dance floor of my own living room. Amy's face twisted with rage, her silver dress catching the light from the tacky party decorations she'd hung on my grandmother's walls. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking with disbelief. But I already had. My hands were steady as I pulled out my phone, the familiar weight of it grounding me in this surreal moment. "For minutes," I said, my voice deadly calm. The guests began shuffling toward the door, their excited chatter replaced by uncomfortable murmurs. This was my house. My sanctuary. The place where 4 generations of my family had lived, loved, and built their dreams. And I had just reclaimed it. But let me tell you how I got here, to this moment of absolute clarity, standing in my own living room like a stranger in my own life. 20 years ago, my husband Robert left me for his secretary. I was 42, and Tommy was just 12. The memory still cuts deep, like a blade that never quite healed. Robert stood in our kitchen, fumbling with his wedding ring, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Caroline," he whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." I gripped the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white, the cool marble the only thing keeping me upright. "Does she make you happy, Robert?" He nodded, still staring at his shoes. That nod destroyed something inside me that I thought would never grow back. But it did, slowly, painfully, like a broken bone that heals stronger than before. Robert kept his promise about the alimony, at least. Every month, without fail, the money came. I saved every penny for Tommy's college fund, working extra hours at the marketing firm to cover our daily expenses. The house, thank God, was already paid for. My grandmother's final gift to me, passed down through generations of strong women who had weathered their own storms within these walls. I remember the day she handed me the deed, her arthritic fingers trembling as she pressed it into my palm. "This house has seen everything, Caroline," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Joy, sorrow, birth, death. It will hold you when nothing else can." She was right. After Robert left, I threw myself into work and raising Tommy. Dating never felt right. My colleagues would try to set me up, but I always declined. "I'm married to my career," I'd joke, but the truth was I'd lost faith in love. Tommy became my whole world. We had our routines, breakfast together every morning, homework at the kitchen table, Sunday movie nights. He graduated with honors and went to a good college, thanks to his father's alimony payments. When Tommy brought home Amy from work last year, I tried to be welcoming. She seemed nice enough, always smiling, complimenting the house, asking about family photos. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she changed the subject whenever work came up. Her gaze would linger on things, calculating, measuring. I'd catch her running her fingers along the antique furniture, her expression unreadable. Still, I told myself I was just being an overprotective mother. "Mom, we're getting married," Tommy announced over dinner one evening. I remember forcing a smile and hugging them both, pushing down the nagging feeling in my gut. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, and I meant it. Or at least, I wanted to mean it. The wedding was small but lovely. I sat in the front row, watching my boy promise his life to this woman I barely knew. Robert was there too, with his new family. We nodded politely to each other but didn't speak. The silence between us was heavy with 20 years of unspoken words. Everything seemed fine at first. They got an apartment across town, both working at the same tech startup. I'd have them over for dinner sometimes, watching how Amy would inspect everything in the house with those calculating eyes of hers. She'd pick up picture frames, examine the silver candlesticks, run her hand along the mahogany dining table. "You have such beautiful things, Caroline," she'd say, but her tone always felt more like an appraisal than a compliment. I never imagined how quickly things would change, or that my peaceful life was about to be turned upside down. I was at work when I got the call from Tommy. His voice was shaking, and I could tell he'd been crying. "Mom, they're laying off half the company. Both Amy and I are being let go." My heart sank. I knew how hard it was to lose a job. I'd seen enough colleagues go through it over my years in marketing. "Take a deep breath, honey. Tell me what you need." "We won't be able to make next month's rent," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our savings are pretty much gone." After some quick calculations, I transferred enough money to cover 3 months of rent for their apartment. It wasn't a small amount, but I had some savings, and this was my son. "This should give you both time to find new jobs," I told him. The weeks that followed were a mix of hope and disappointment. Tommy landed a new position at a smaller company, but the salary was significantly lower than what he'd been making before. Amy, on the other hand, well, I tried not to judge, but her job search seemed half-hearted at best. When I'd visit them, I'd often find her scrolling through social media instead of job listings. "The market is just so competitive right now," she'd sigh dramatically, not looking up from her phone. I refused to settle for something beneath my qualifications. I'd learned in my years of marriage to Robert that sometimes silence was the kindest response. Then came another call from Tommy, just as the 3 months were coming to an end. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but is there any chance we could stay with you for a while? Just until things get better?" I looked around my big empty house, thinking of all the unused rooms. "Of course, honey. You know there's always space for you here." They arrived on a Sunday afternoon, their car packed with belongings. As I helped them carry boxes up to Tommy's old room, I couldn't help but notice Amy's eyes darting around the house, taking everything in with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Caroline," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "your room is just gorgeous. And that home office setup? It would be perfect for our workspace while we're job hunting. Maybe Tommy and I could take that room? It's bigger, and since there are 2 of us." "I'm sorry, Amy," I said firmly but politely, "but that's my personal space. I need my office for work, and I sometimes have to take calls late at night. Tommy's old room is quite spacious, and you'll have plenty of storage in the guest room across the hall." Her face fell, and though she didn't say anything, the look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. She pursed her lips and turned away, dragging her suitcase up the stairs with more force than necessary. I should have recognized that look. I'd seen it before, in the eyes of people who believed the world owed them something. Tommy gave me an apologetic smile. "Thanks for this, Mom. We really appreciate it." Life settled into a new routine, or at least that's what I tried to tell myself. Every morning, I'd get up at 6 o'clock, make coffee, and head to work. Tommy would leave around the same time for his new job. And Amy? Well, Amy would still be asleep. I tried not to think about it too much during those first few days. "She's probably still applying for jobs online," I told myself. But as the days went by, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Each evening when I returned from work, I'd find her exactly where she'd been that morning, sprawled on my living room couch, phone in hand, surrounded by empty snack bags and coffee mugs. The dishes from her lunch would be piled in the sink, crumbs scattered across my kitchen counter. "How was the job search today?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, nothing really suitable for my qualifications," she'd reply without looking up from her phone. 2 weeks passed like this. The house, which I'd always kept immaculate, was starting to show signs of neglect. Dust gathered on the furniture, dishes piled up, and laundry overflowed from the hampers. I found myself cleaning around her, picking up the mess she left in her wake like a maid in my own home. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, "A house reflects the soul of its keeper." What did that make me now? After a particularly long day at work, I decided it was time for a gentle conversation. We were sitting at dinner, a meal I prepared after cleaning the kitchen first. I cleared my throat nervously. Amy, honey, I began, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. I was thinking, since you're home during the day, maybe you could help out a bit with the housework? Just until you find a job, of course. The change in her expression was instant. Her fork clattered against the plate, and her eyes welled up with tears. I knew it, she cried, turning to Tommy. I knew she'd try to turn me into her maid. Just because I'm temporarily unemployed doesn't mean I should be your mother's servant. I sat there, stunned. Amy, that's not what you've been looking down on me since day one, she interrupted, her voice rising to a wail. You think I'm not good enough for your precious son or your precious house. The word precious dripped from her lips like venom. Amy, please, I didn't mean, but she was already pushing back her chair, running from the table with dramatic flair. Tommy stood up, his face dark with anger. Mom, I can't believe you'd be so cruel to Amy. She's going through a really tough time right now. I looked at my son, this man who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that Mom could fix anything. Now he was looking at me like I was the problem. I just thought, you thought what? That you could humiliate my wife in her time of need? His words hit me like physical blows. Tommy, I was only trying to help. You call attacking someone who's already down helping? He shook his head in disgust and followed his wife upstairs. I sat alone at the table, the sound of Amy's dramatic sobs echoing through the house. My untouched dinner grew cold as I stared at the wall, wondering how I'd become the villain in my own home. After that night, things got even worse. I still did all the cooking and cleaning while they ordered takeout and left their empty containers wherever they finished eating. Out of habit, or maybe hope, I'd still call them to join me for dinner when I cooked. They'd come down, eat without a word, and leave their dirty dishes on the table. The silence was deafening. I tried to remember the last time Tommy had really talked to me, not just grunted responses or defensive accusations. When had my son become a stranger? The weeks dragged by, each day feeling longer than the last. The sound of the TV from the living room had become a constant backdrop to my home life, along with the gentle tap-tap of Amy's fingers on her phone screen. I tried to stay out of her way, spending more time at the office than necessary, but the situation weighed heavily on my mind. One morning during our weekly department meeting, our HR director mentioned they were looking for an office manager. My ears perked up immediately. What's the starting salary? I asked, as casually as I could. $45,000 to start, she replied, but there's room for growth. We promote from within whenever possible. I thought about Amy's resume. She had a business degree and had worked in administration before. This could be perfect. I spent my lunch break drafting a careful text to Amy about the position, but then deleted it. This was the kind of news better delivered in person. I left work early that day, my heart light with hope. Maybe this could be the solution to our problems. I found Amy in her usual spot on the couch, scrolling through her phone. A half-eaten bag of chips lay on the coffee table, crumbs scattered across the surface. Amy, I said, trying to keep my voice bright and encouraging, I have some good news. There's an opening at my company for an office manager. It's entry-level, but there's real potential for advancement. The starting salary is decent, and I could drive you to work. We could commute together. The transformation in her face was immediate and terrifying. She shot up from the couch, sending the chip bag flying. Are you serious right now? An office manager? Do you know what my qualifications are? I just thought, you thought what? That I'd be happy to fetch coffee and organize paper clips? Her voice was rising with each word. I have a business degree. I was a project coordinator. The disdain in her voice was palpable, as if the very idea of honest work was beneath her. Amy, please, I didn't mean, oh, I know exactly what you meant, she was practically shrieking now. You think I'm a freeloader. You think I'm lazy. You can't stand the fact that I'm not working, so you're trying to force me into some degrading position. Just then, Tommy walked through the front door, his timing impossibly bad. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Amy rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. Your mother just insulted me again. She thinks I'm a freeloader. She's trying to force me to take some menial job as an office manager. I stood up, my hands shaking. Tommy, that's not true. I was just trying to help. There's an opening at my company, and I thought, Mom, stop. Tommy's voice cut through the room like a knife. Why do you always have to do this? Why can't you just leave Amy alone? Do what? I asked, genuinely confused. I'm just trying to help. Amy scoffed through her tears. You're trying to humiliate me. She ran up the stairs, her dramatic sobs echoing through the house. Tommy gave me a look of pure disappointment. I never thought you could be so difficult to live with, Mom, he said, shaking his head. You're constantly starting drama. It's like you can't help yourself. He followed his wife upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the living room. I sank back into my chair, my half-finished coffee growing cold in my hands. Starting drama, I whispered to myself, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. In all my 62 years, no one had ever accused me of being dramatic. The days turned into weeks, and I learned to keep my mouth shut about the job situation. The mere mention of work would make Amy's eyes narrow dangerously, so I stopped bringing it up altogether. It was easier that way, even if it meant watching her waste her days away on my couch. Things changed when Tommy got his first big commission at work. Suddenly, Amy was going out more often, returning with shopping bags from expensive boutiques and fresh manicures that probably cost more than our weekly grocery bill. Not once did she think to pick up laundry detergent or paper towels. Those mundane household items remained my responsibility. I watched her parade around the house in designer clothes, her nails perfectly manicured, her hair freshly styled. She'd model her new outfits for Tommy, who would praise her lavishly. You deserve beautiful things, baby, he'd say, pulling her close. After everything you've been through. Everything she'd been through. As if unemployment was a trauma she'd suffered rather than a situation she'd chosen to prolong. I kept hoping that with Tommy's improved income, they'd start looking for their own place. Each morning, I'd check the local rental listings on my phone, imagining them finding a nice apartment across town. But they seemed perfectly content to stay put, making themselves more and more at home in my house. One evening, I came home to find Amy excitedly chatting on her phone in my living room. Oh my God, yes, the house is absolutely perfect for a party, she was saying. You should see the vintage chandelier in the dining room. It'll look amazing in photos. I set down my briefcase, my stomach already nodding. What party? She hung up and turned to Tommy, who had just walked in. Babe, we should definitely have our anniversary party here. Can you believe it's been almost 2 years? Where exactly are you planning to have this party? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Here, of course. Amy gestured around my living room. This house is gorgeous, Caroline. All our friends will love it. I'm thinking we could set up the bar in the foyer and maybe move some furniture around in the living room to create a dance floor. Shouldn't you have asked me first? I interrupted, trying to keep my voice level. But Amy was already scrolling through her phone, her excitement palpable. We should invite the Hendersons, and maybe that new couple from your office, Tommy. Oh, and we absolutely need to call that catering company we used for New Year's. I turned to Tommy, hoping he'd say something, but he was nodding along with his wife's plans, a smile on his face. Later that evening, I cornered Tommy in the kitchen. Mom, I know what you're going to say, he started, but it would mean so much to Amy. She's been feeling down lately, and this would really lift her spirits. This is my house, Tommy. You can't just decide to throw a party here without asking me first. Please, Mom? He gave me that look, the same one he used to give me when he wanted extra dessert as a child. I promise we'll take care of everything. I'll even hire a cleaning service to come in afterward. You won't have to lift a finger. I stood there, looking at my son, this man who used to be the considerate boy I'd raised, and felt my resolve crumbling. Fine, I sighed, already knowing I'd regret this decision. But I want everything back in its proper place afterward. Thanks, Mom, you're the best. He hugged me quickly and bounded up the stairs to tell Amy the good news. The week leading up to the party was a whirlwind of activity, none of which I was included in. Amy took over my house like a general planning a military campaign. Delivery trucks came and went, bringing everything from fancy tablecloths to crystal champagne flutes. She rearranged my furniture without asking, pushing my favorite reading chair into a corner to make room for a makeshift dance floor. I kept my distance, retreating to my office whenever possible. Still, I couldn't help but overhear her endless phone conversations about appetizer selections and wine choices. My grandmother's antique vase was moved to make room for elaborate flower arrangements. My family photos were taken down to be replaced with string lights and paper lanterns. I watched her handle my grandmother's things with casual indifference, and something cold settled in my chest. These weren't just decorations to be moved around. They were my history, my heritage, my connection to the women who had lived in this house before me. But Amy saw them as obstacles to her perfect party. Friday afternoon, I left work early. I had even bought a new dress for the occasion, nothing too fancy, just a simple navy blue cocktail dress that I thought would be appropriate. As I pulled into my driveway, I could see cars already lining the street. The music was already thumping, and I could hear laughter and conversation spilling out from my own home. I took a deep breath and walked up to my own front door. Inside, the house was barely recognizable. The furniture had been pushed against the walls, creating an open space in the center where people were already dancing. The air was thick with the smell of catering food and expensive perfume. My home had been transformed into something foreign, something that no longer felt like mine. Amy spotted me from across the room. She was wearing a short silver dress that caught the light from the newly installed party lights, her hair and makeup professionally done. She looked radiant, triumphant. She excused herself from the group she was talking to and walked over to me, her face fixed in an artificial smile. "Caroline," she said, her voice sickly sweet but loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I thought you'd be gone by now." I blinked in confusion. Gone? Why would I be gone? Oh, she tilted her head, her smile never wavering, "I guess I forgot to mention. This party is really just for our friends, you know? Young people. I assumed you'd make other arrangements for the evening. Maybe get a hotel room?" I stood there, stunned, as a few of her friends nearby giggled into their champagne glasses. The sound of their laughter felt like glass breaking inside my chest. "This is my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, and you've been so generous letting us use it," Amy said, patting my arm condescendingly. "But you have to understand, having someone's mom at an anniversary party is kind of a buzzkill." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked past her to Tommy, who was standing nearby, watching this exchange. Surely he wouldn't allow this. Surely he would step in and defend me. "Mom," he said, walking over, "Amy's right. This is really more of a young people's party. It might be better if you weren't here." In that moment, something inside me, something that had been stretching thinner and thinner over the past months, finally snapped. The room seemed to tilt, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was my house. My sanctuary. The place where my grandmother had taught me to be strong, where my mother had shown me how to endure, where I had raised my son with love and sacrifice. And they wanted me to leave. Without a word, I turned and walked up the stairs. Behind me, I could hear Amy's smug voice, "See? I knew she'd be reasonable about this. She's probably just gone to pack an overnight bag." I entered Tommy's old room, their room now, and pulled their suitcases from under the bed. My hands were steady as I began emptying drawers, folding nothing, just throwing their clothes into the bags. Designer dresses, expensive suits, all the things they'd bought with Tommy's new salary, into the suitcases they went. I stripped the bed, wrapped their toiletries in a towel, and added those too. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The music thumped below as I dragged the heavy suitcases down the stairs, one in each hand. The sound of them bumping against each step drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted as I entered the living room, faces turning from their conversations to watch the scene unfold. "Mom." Tommy's voice cracked. "What are you doing?" And that's when I dropped the suitcases in the middle of the makeshift dance floor and said the words that changed everything. "You're leaving. Now. The party's over." Amy's face contorted with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed. "You can't do this." "This is my house," I said, my voice deadly calm. "You have exactly 5 minutes to leave before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." "Mom, come on," Tommy laughed nervously. "You're joking, right?" I pulled out my phone. 4 minutes. The guests began shuffling toward the door, muttering among themselves. Some were already calling Ubers. "You deranged old fool." Amy stepped toward me, her finger pointed at my face. I moved so quickly it surprised even me, closing the distance between us until we were nose to nose. "Call me one more name," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "and I'll show you exactly how much fight this old fool has left in her. Try me." The color drained from Amy's face. She stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest suitcase. Tommy stood frozen for a moment before reaching for the second bag. "Mom," he started, his voice breaking. "Get out." They walked to the door, Amy still muttering curses under her breath. Tommy looked back once, but I had already turned away, beginning to take down the tacky decorations they'd hung on my walls. After they left, I surveyed the abandoned party scene. Tables loaded with untouched food, half-empty champagne glasses scattered everywhere. My grandmother's vase, thankfully, still intact. I began boxing up the catering trays. The local homeless shelter was still open. At least some good could come from all this food. The weeks after the party passed quietly. Too quietly, perhaps, but after months of chaos, the silence in my house felt like a blessing. I put everything back in its proper place. My reading chair returned to its spot by the window. My family photos back on the walls. My grandmother's vase, centerpiece on the dining room table. News travels fast in small towns. Sarah, my friend who works in real estate, told me Tommy and Amy had rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the new complex across town. "Funny thing," she said over coffee one morning, "Janet from the leasing office is an old friend. Says they almost didn't pass the credit check, but Tommy's new salary just barely got them approved." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. More stories trickled in. Martha, whose niece lives in the same building, reported that the property manager had already given them 2 warnings about the state of their apartment during routine inspections. "The place is a mess," Martha confided, shaking her head. "Garbage piling up, dishes in the sink for days." Sound familiar? I just nodded, remembering my own kitchen during their stay. Then came word of the arguments. They weren't exactly subtle about it. The neighbors could hear them through the walls. Amy screaming about Tommy's pathetic salary, how she was sick of living in a dump, how none of her friends had to live like this. Tommy firing back about her refusing to work, to cook, to clean, to do anything at all, really. They say she throws things sometimes, my friend Linda whispered during our weekly lunch. Tommy was seen sleeping in his car one night last week. Each story made my heart ache a little. Not for Amy, I was done wasting sympathy on her. But for Tommy. He was still my son, despite everything. I remembered the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who would make me Mother's Day cards with crayon drawings of stick figures holding hands. "That's you and me, Mommy," he'd say proudly, and we're happy. When had we stopped being happy? When had love become conditional? Sometimes I'd pick up the phone, my finger hovering over his number. But I always put it down again. This is his lesson to learn, his path to walk. The house feels different now. Peaceful, yes, but also waiting. Like it knows this isn't the end of the story. Some nights, as I sit in my reading chair with a cup of tea, I look at the photos on the wall. Tommy's graduation, his first baseball game, the two of us at the beach when he was 10. I remember the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that Mom could fix anything. But I can't fix this for him. He needs to see it for himself, to understand what he's become, and find his way back to being the person I raised him to be. Until then, I'll be here, in our family home, keeping his room ready. Just in case. Not for Amy, that bridge is well and truly burned. But for my son, when he's ready to apologize, to talk, to rebuild. In the meantime, I'm reclaiming my life. I joined a book club, started taking painting classes on weekends, and even adopted a cat from the local shelter. His name is Oliver, and he's excellent company. He sits with me in the evenings, purring contentedly as I read, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence with empty words. Life goes on, as it always does. And when Tommy's ready, he'll know where to find me. The house will be waiting. I'll be waiting. Because that's what mothers do. We wait. We hope. We keep the light on. And sometimes, just sometimes, our children find their way home.